Every day, our minds play tricks on us that we often don't even realize. We make decisions, form opinions, and act based on mental processes that can deceive us and distance us from objective reality. These mental traps are cognitive biases that shape our perception of the world and subtly but powerfully influence our actions. Without realizing it, we fall into these traps, whether it's the illusion of control, resistance to the unknown, or the tendency to judge others based on thoughts we don't fully recognize. The gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is a cognitive illusion that many of us have experienced, often without knowing it. It is the belief that past events in a random sequence affect future outcomes, as if the universe has a memory or a need to correct imbalances. A classic example is the idea that after several consecutive tails in a coin toss, the next flip is due to be heads. This reasoning, although intuitive, is fundamentally flawed because each flip is an independent event with an equal probability of landing on either side. At a neurological level, this fallacy is fueled by our natural tendency to seek patterns and causalities, even where none exist. The human brain is a powerful pattern recognition machine, a skill crucial for survival throughout evolution. However, this same ability can lead us to see connections where there are none, especially in random situations. The comfort we find in patterns gives us a false sense of control and predictability, something our brains deeply appreciate, even in illogical activities like gambling. Additionally, the gambler's fallacy can be exacerbated by loss aversion and the desire to make up for past losses. In gambling, if a series of unwanted outcomes occurs, one might feel that a positive turnaround is imminent, as a form of cosmic balance. This thought is reinforced by the irrational hope that luck is about to change, leading to risky decisions in an attempt to recover what was lost. The brain, in seeking to avoid the pain of loss, can easily fall into the trap of believing that future events are influenced by past ones, even in purely random processes. This type of thinking is not limited to gambling. It can manifest in other areas of life, such as financial investments, where investors believe an asset is due to rise or fall based on its recent performance. The gambler's fallacy, therefore, can lead to reckless and harmful decisions based on a misunderstanding of probability and the independence of events. Confirmation bias. Neurologically, the brain tends to favor information consistent with existing beliefs because it requires less cognitive effort. Assimilating information that aligns with our expectations demands less mental energy than processing conflicting data. The brain's reward system also plays a significant role, releasing dopamine when we encounter information that supports our opinions. This dopamine release creates a sense of pleasure and satisfaction, further reinforcing the search for confirmation. Moreover, our memory is selective, meaning we are more likely to remember events and information that support our pre-existing views. This process is not only a reflection of what we choose to remember, but also of how we store information. The brain categorizes and stores memories in a way that creates coherent narratives, making it easier to access memories that confirm our beliefs and rendering those that contradict them less accessible. This natural tendency can be observed in various situations, from political debates to lifestyle choices. For example, a person with a specific viewpoint on a controversial topic, such as climate change, may pay more attention to news and research that confirm their position while disregarding or questioning the credibility of sources presenting a different perspective. This behavior not only limits a full understanding of an issue, but can also lead to increasing polarization, where groups with divergent opinions grow further apart. The endowment effect. The feeling of ownership activates brain areas associated with reward and personal identity. Owning an object not only makes it functionally useful, but also connects it to our identity and personal history. This emotional attachment can increase the perception of value, making it difficult to be objective when considering discarding or selling the item. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter related to pleasure and reward, is often released in situations of ownership, reinforcing attachment to what we possess. Moreover, the endowment effect can be explained by loss aversion, an inherent human trait that makes us feel the loss of something more intensely than the satisfaction of acquiring a new good. This aversion is so powerful that we often prefer to keep something we already own rather than face the discomfort of parting with it, even if the object no longer has practical use. A common everyday example of this effect can be observed when we keep clothes we no longer wear or hold on to decorative items that have lost their appeal. The mere thought of getting rid of these items can evoke a sense of loss disproportionate to the real value of the object, exacerbated by the memory and personal significance we attribute to them. This creates a psychological barrier that prevents us from acting pragmatically. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your subscription helps us keep creating content with love and dedication. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is a fascinating phenomenon that reveals a peculiarity of human behavior. The fear of losing often outweighs the prospect of gaining something of equivalent value. This propensity is deeply rooted in our psychology and brain function, influencing our decisions in subtle yet powerful ways. Neurologically, the sensation of loss activates brain areas associated with discomfort and pain, such as the amygdala, which is related to emotional responses and fear processing. This activation can be more intense than that experienced with gains, even of equivalent value. This occurs because, evolutionarily, avoiding losses may have been more crucial for survival than taking advantage of opportunities. Losing essential resources could mean the difference between life and death, explaining the strong and often disproportionate reaction we have to loss. This aversion is not limited to financial or material aspects. It also applies to emotional and social situations. For example, the fear of losing an important relationship can lead a person to cling to unhealthy bonds, avoiding breaks that, despite being painful, could pave the way for new opportunities and personal growth. Similarly, in the professional realm, the fear of risking a secure job may prevent someone from pursuing a new career that could offer greater satisfaction and fulfillment. Loss aversion can lead to excessively cautious behaviors, where the individual avoids any risk, even when the potential rewards outweigh the risks. This can manifest as conservative financial investments, life decisions that prioritize safety over personal satisfaction, or reluctance to express opinions and ideas for fear of rejection or failure. The tendency to focus on what could be lost, rather than also considering what could be gained, limits the potential for growth and innovation. The bandwagon effect. The bandwagon effect is a curious and often powerful manifestation of human behavior, where individuals are inclined to adopt certain actions or ideas simply because they perceive that many others are doing the same. This inclination has deep roots in social psychology and brain function, reflecting our inherently social nature and desire for belonging. The feeling of security and acceptance that comes from following the majority can be explained by the activation of the brain's reward system, which releases neurotransmitters like dopamine, creating a sense of well-being. When we observe others adhering to a behavior or belief, the brain interprets it as a signal that such a choice is safe and socially acceptable, thus reducing the discomfort of uncertainty. Moreover, the bandwagon effect is linked to the fear of social exclusion. The human mind is profoundly influenced by the fear of being excluded or marginalized, which can be perceived as a threat to our survival, given our evolutionary history of relying on groups for protection and resources. Thus, there is an instinctive inclination to follow the majority, even if it goes against individual judgment. This phenomenon is often observed in various aspects of daily life, from fashion trends and consumer choices to political and social decisions. For example, a person may feel subtle pressure to support a particular candidate or cause, not necessarily out of conviction, but because it seems to be the popular opinion. This behavior can lead to poorly considered or even irrational decisions, as the person may neglect their own needs and values in favor of aligning with a group. It's interesting to note how the bandwagon effect can manifest almost imperceptibly. Small signals, such as the increase in followers on a social network or the popularity of a product, can influence our choices subconsciously. The brain, by picking up on these signals, may interpret something as valuable or correct simply because it is widely accepted. The planning fallacy. Often, when faced with the need to complete a task, we tend to underestimate how long it will really take. This underestimation is not merely a matter of inexperience, but is rooted in deep psychological aspects. Our brain, when planning for the future, tends to focus on the best possible scenarios, ignoring or minimizing potential obstacles. This optimism bias is reinforced by our selective memory, which often remembers times when we were efficient, forgetting occasions when we were caught off guard by unforeseen events. The human mind, when creating a plan, focuses more on what it idealizes as the perfect course, disregarding the inherent complexity of most activities. Additionally, the way memory works can significantly influence this distorted perception. Studies show that our brain tends to remember past events more concisely and simplified than they actually were. Thus, when recalling tasks already completed, we tend to remember only the main points, forgetting the details that consume time and energy. This process of simplification in memory contributes to a false sense of speed and efficiency. Another relevant factor is the inability to adequately predict the interference of external events and variables beyond our control. The mind, when projecting the future, often disregards the complexity of the real world and the presence of external factors that can delay or complicate task completion. This short-sightedness in planning is a direct consequence of our difficulty in evaluating uncertainty. Action bias. Action bias is a fascinating inclination that many of us experience, where we feel the need to act, even when the best option might be simply doing nothing. This impulse for action is largely driven by a combination of psychological and neurological factors that make us associate movement with control and effectiveness. At the brain level, the act of taking action is often associated with a sense of relief and satisfaction. The brain's reward system, which releases dopamine, is activated when we take steps to solve a problem or improve a situation, reinforcing the belief that action is always the right response. This dopamine release not only provides a sense of pleasure, but also gives us a sense of control over our circumstances, something the human brain deeply values. The human brain has a natural aversion to uncertainty and the unknown. When we are in a situation where the best course of action is unclear, hesitation can seem like a threat to our sense of security and competence. This discomfort is often alleviated by action, even if that action is symbolic or ineffective, because it gives us the feeling that we are doing something to improve the situation. Whether in a work context where a quick response is expected, or in personal situations, such as an interpersonal conflict, the pressure to do something can be intense. The mind often equates action with productivity and efficiency, creating a false dichotomy where inaction is seen as laziness or lack of interest. Sometimes the most effective decision is to wait, gather more information, or allow things to take their natural course. This can be especially true in complex contexts where impulsive actions can lead to unintended consequences or exacerbate the situation. The Battermanhoff phenomenon. The Battermanhoff phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion, is a curious experience many of us have had, the feeling that after noticing something new, it seems to appear everywhere. This effect is particularly interesting because it reveals much about how our brain works, especially in terms of perception and pattern recognition. When we encounter new information, whether a word, an idea, or an object, our brain registers it as potentially important. This prioritization occurs because our cognitive system is constantly filtering information, seeking to highlight what is relevant to our survival and well-being. This ability to identify and focus on patterns is an evolutionary trait that helped us quickly recognize threats or opportunities in the environment. However, this same mechanism can deceive us, making us perceive a supposed increased frequency of something simply because we are now more aware of its existence. For example, after learning a new word, it is common to feel that it appears in various conversations, books, or media, when, in reality, the word is always present, but our perception of it was limited. Once sensitized to this new information, the brain begins to notice its presence much more frequently. This phenomenon is closely linked to the functioning of memory and selective attention. When something becomes salient to us, it stands out more easily amidst the constant flow of information we receive daily. This selection of attention is a powerful tool, but is also susceptible to cognitive biases like the Battermanhoff phenomenon. Our brain can interpret the repeated encounters with a new stimulus as confirmation of its importance, further reinforcing the perception of its omnipresence. The Ikea Effect. The Ikea Effect is a fascinating example of how personal involvement in creating something can distort our perception of value. When we put time and effort into assembling furniture or creating a project, we tend to value the final result disproportionately. This exaggerated appreciation is not necessarily based on the object's intrinsic quality, but rather on our contribution to its existence. Neurologically, this phenomenon is related to the emotional connection we develop with the things we help build. The sense of accomplishment and competence we feel upon completing a task activates the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine and providing a sense of pleasure. This positive experience reinforces the perception of value, making us more likely to appreciate something that, objectively, may not be superior to ready-made or better quality alternatives. Additionally, the Ikea effect can be seen as an extension of the effort bias, where we believe something is more valuable or significant simply because we invested energy in creating it. This bias is an expression of the human desire to see our work as meaningful and valuable. Thus, when we assemble furniture or complete a craft project, we are not just creating an object. We are also creating a part of our identity, a tangible proof of our skill and dedication. This tendency, however, can lead to irrational attachments to objects or projects. We may feel reluctant to discard or replace something we made, even when an objective assessment suggests that the item does not meet our needs or expectations. For example, someone may insist on keeping a piece of furniture they assembled themselves, despite it being less functional or aesthetically pleasing, simply because they value it more due to the effort involved in its assembly. The Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a fascinating and sometimes unsettling psychological phenomenon that leads us to reflect on our competencies and limitations. It describes the tendency of people with low ability or knowledge in a specific area to overestimate their competence. This bias is particularly common in situations where ignorance about one's ignorance prevents a realistic assessment of personal capabilities. Neurologically, the Dunning-Kruger effect occurs because a lack of skill in a particular area also impairs the ability to self-assess. When we lack sufficient knowledge about a topic, we also lack the necessary experience to recognize our incompetence. This is often accompanied by inflated confidence, resulting from the illusion of knowing more than we actually do. This is a defense mechanism of the ego, a way to protect our self-image and self-esteem. At the same time, the effect also reveals a flaw in metacognition, that is, the ability to reflect on our own thinking. Less experienced people tend to underestimate the complexity of tasks or knowledge, resulting in a simplified and misguided view of their abilities. This can lead to a range of problems, from making poor decisions to resisting seeking help or feedback. The Ambiguity Effect. The ambiguity effect is a cognitive bias many of us experience in various life situations. It manifests as a tendency to avoid choices involving uncertain outcomes, preferring those where the results are more predictable and known. This preference for certainty can be comforting, but can also limit our willingness to explore new opportunities that could potentially be enriching or beneficial. Neurologically, the ambiguity effect is rooted in our natural aversion to uncertainty. The human brain seeks stability and predictability as mechanisms of protection and survival. When confronted with ambiguous situations, the brain activates areas associated with fear and anxiety, such as the amygdala, which responds to uncertainty as if it were a threat. This emotional response can lead us to avoid the unknown, even if it means missing out on valuable opportunities. On a more practical level, this bias can manifest in various aspects of our daily lives. For example, we may hesitate to try a new restaurant, opt not to travel to an unknown destination, or avoid changing jobs, even when the new position could offer growth and more interesting challenges. Familiarity provides a comfort zone that the unknown simply cannot offer, and this apparent safety can be hard to leave behind. The Doro effect. The Doro effect is an intriguing phenomenon that reveals how a single new acquisition can trigger a series of subsequent, often unplanned purchases. This tendency is named after the French philosopher Denis Diderot, who, after acquiring a new robe, felt the need to update other items in his environment to match his new garment. This experience illustrates how a purchase can start a spiral of consumption, where each new acquisition creates a perceived need for others, leading to a continuous cycle of expenses. Psychologically, the Diderot effect can be explained by the way our brain processes identity and the desire for coherence. When we acquire something new, especially something we feel improves our quality of life or status, it can alter our perception of identity. We want our other belongings to be in harmony with this new acquisition, creating a sense of aesthetic or functional cohesion. This desire for consistency is a reflection of our quest for order and balance in our lives. Moreover, the new purchase can generate a sense of euphoria and satisfaction, activating the brain's reward system through the release of dopamine. This momentary pleasure can encourage further purchases in the pursuit of replicating the pleasant sensation. Thus, buying becomes not only a quest for objects that improve our well-being, but also a way to experience again the positive emotion associated with acquisition. A common example of the Diderot effect can be observed in technology purchases. Buying a new smartphone can lead to purchasing new accessories, such as cases, headphones, or other complementary gadgets. Similarly, renovating a room in the house can create the need to redecorate adjacent spaces to maintain a harmonious aesthetic. In both cases, the initial acquisition creates a series of new desires that were not initially considered. The decoy effect. The decoy effect is a subtle yet powerful tactic that can influence our choices in ways we often don't realize. This phenomenon occurs when we are presented with a third option, usually less attractive, that serves to direct our attention and make us prefer one of the other two main options. This manipulation technique is widely used in marketing and sales, taking advantage of how our brains process comparisons and decision-making. In the context of the human brain, decision-making is often a complex process laden with uncertainties. When confronted with several options, we seek mental shortcuts to help simplify the choice. The decoy effect exploits this tendency, introducing an option that, despite being visibly inferior or less advantageous, alters the perception of the other alternatives. For example, if we are deciding between two products, a cheaper, basic one and a more expensive, feature-rich one, the introduction of a third option that is slightly more expensive than the basic but significantly less functional than the more expensive can make the pricier product seem like a more sensible and valuable choice. This phenomenon is related to how the human brain deals with aversion to uncertainty and complexity. By introducing a decoy option, a reference is created that facilitates comparison, making the more expensive choice appear more justified. Our mind, in search of simplification and reduction of doubt, often clings to this new reference, ignoring that the third option was introduced specifically to manipulate the decision. This manipulation is effective because it takes advantage of a natural cognitive bias, the tendency to compare options based on relative attributes, rather than evaluating each independently of its context. The decoy is not designed to be a real choice, but to make another option more attractive in comparison. This strategy can be seen in various situations, such as subscription service packages, where the presence of an intermediate plan makes the more expensive and comprehensive plan more tempting. The bystander effect. The bystander effect is an intriguing and, at the same time, unsettling phenomenon that manifests in situations of emergency or need. It is the tendency for individuals to be less likely to help someone when they are in a situation with many others around. This inaction may seem counterintuitive, as many would think that the presence of more people would increase the chance of someone intervening. However, the reality is that the responsibility to act tends to dissipate among all present, resulting in a paradox of collective passivity. Scientifically, the bystander effect is explained by the diffusion of responsibility. Our brain processes the presence of others as a sign that the responsibility is shared. Thus, instead of feeling a direct obligation to act, each person may subconsciously expect someone else to take the initiative. This mental process is reinforced by observing the behavior of others. If no one is reacting to a situation, it is easy for an individual to conclude that intervention is unnecessary or that someone more qualified should take the lead. The brain, in its quest for social cues, tends to follow the behavior of the majority, which can lead to collective paralysis. This phenomenon is particularly potent in situations of great uncertainty or danger, where hesitation to stand out or make a mistake can override the impulse to act. The presence of many bystanders can thus create an environment where everyone expects someone to do something, but no one actually moves, perpetuating the cycle of inaction. This behavior is not just theoretical. It is observed in many real events. A classic example is the case of Kitty Genovese in 1964, where a woman was attacked in New York, and despite multiple witnesses, no one intervened in time to save her life. Cases like this are a powerful demonstration of how the bystander effect can have severe and real consequences. The availability heuristic. The availability heuristic occurs because the human brain is designed to conserve energy and time. Faced with the immense amount of information we encounter daily, our mind needs strategies to quickly process what is relevant. The availability heuristic comes into play by allowing us to use recent or emotionally striking experiences to make quick judgments. For example, if we recently heard news about airplane accidents, we might overestimate the likelihood of an air disaster, even though statistics show that flying is very safe. The ease with which these events come to mind creates a distorted impression of their frequency. Moreover, the media and the way we consume information also play a crucial role in this mental shortcut. Events that are widely publicized or have a strong emotional impact are more likely to be remembered. This intense coverage can make these events seem more common than they actually are. For example, violent crimes or natural disasters, by their sensational nature, receive disproportionate attention in the media, leading people to believe they are more prevalent than statistics indicate. The availability heuristic is also influenced by our personal experiences. If someone has a friend who succeeded in a startup, they might overestimate the likelihood of new businesses succeeding, ignoring the statistics that most startups fail. This bias is reinforced by the ease with which success stories are remembered and shared, in contrast to the less glamorous stories of failure. The end of history illusion. The end of history illusion is a fascinating peculiarity of human thought that leads us to believe that our personal development has reached its final point and that we will change very little in the future. It's as if we view ourselves in the present as the final product of a long journey of growth without considering our ongoing capacity for transformation. This illusion profoundly underestimates our ability to evolve and change over time. Psychologically, this tendency may be related to the comfort we find in stability and predictability. The human brain prefers certainty over the unknown, and this extends to how we view our own development. By believing that we have already become the most complete and mature version of ourselves, we avoid the anxiety associated with a potential unknown of what we can become. Furthermore, this perception of completeness can provide a sense of identity and coherence, which is important for a sense of self-control and security. However, throughout life, it is evident that we continue to change, often in ways we could not predict. Looking back, it's clear that the me from 5 or 10 years ago is significantly different from our current me. Our opinions, tastes, relationships, and aspirations have evolved. Yet, when projecting into the future, we tend to believe that this process of change has stabilized, that we will not be as different as we were. This limited view can lead us to make decisions based on a static understanding of who we are, ignoring the potential for future growth. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is an intriguing feature of the human mind that makes us believe that past events were more predictable than they actually were. After something has happened, it's common to hear or think, "I knew that was going to happen," or "that was obvious." This sense of retrospective predictability can create false confidence and lead to unfair judgments about decisions made before the events unfolded. This tendency arises from how our brain processes and organizes information. When we look back, the knowledge of the outcome influences our memory and perception of the events that led to it. The mind restructures the sequence of events, highlighting elements that seem to point to the inevitable conclusion. This process makes the outcome appear clearer and more predictable than it was when the decisions were actually made, when uncertainty and complexity prevailed. The "I knew it" fallacy is reinforced by our need to find patterns and causality. The human brain seeks order and meaning in a world often chaotic and unpredictable. By reconstructing past events as logical and inevitable, we gain a sense of control and understanding, which can be comforting but also illusory. This not only distorts our view of the past, but can also affect our ability to learn from it, as we judge past decisions with unjustified severity. In the context of personal and professional relationships, hindsight bias can be particularly harmful. In the workplace, for example, leaders and colleagues may wrongly assess someone's past decisions, believing that negative outcomes were obvious and avoidable. This can lead to a culture of blame and recrimination rather than a constructive and learning-based approach. In our personal lives, we can apply this same bias to ourselves, harshly judging our past choices and forgetting the uncertainty context in which they were made. Reactants bias. Reactants bias is a fascinating and often unconscious psychological response that manifests when we feel our freedom of choice is being threatened. When someone tells us what to do or imposes a rule, we may feel compelled to act in the opposite way, not necessarily because we disagree with the guidance, but as a way to reaffirm our autonomy. This reaction is particularly common in situations where we feel our personal control is at stake, such as when someone comments on our eating habits or lifestyle. Reactance is deeply rooted in our brain and the human desire for freedom and self-determination. Neurologically, this tendency may be linked to the activation of brain areas associated with autonomy and identity. When we perceive a threat to our independence, the limbic system, responsible for emotions, can trigger a resistance response, motivated by a sense of loss of control. This reaction is a way to protect our personal integrity, ensuring that our decisions are truly ours. However, this behavior can lead to impulsive decisions that go against our interests. For example, if we're trying to follow a healthy diet and someone comments, even with good intentions, about what we should eat, we may feel a sudden urge to consume exactly what we are trying to avoid. This reaction is not necessarily logical, but is an attempt to reaffirm that our choices are not dictated by others. This bias can manifest in various areas of life, from resistance to professional advice to rejection of social or family norms. Even when the advice is sensible or beneficial, the feeling of being controlled can trigger a counterreaction. This phenomenon is particularly visible in adolescence when the desire for independence is especially strong but can persist throughout adulthood, affecting decisions in various contexts. The Zynic Effect. The Zynic Effect is a fascinating psychological phenomenon that reveals how our minds work intriguingly about unfinished tasks. Often, we find ourselves repeatedly thinking about something we left halfway through, while completed tasks tend to disappear from our consciousness more quickly. This effect was identified by psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, who observed that people remembered interrupted tasks better than those they had finished. Scientifically, the Zygarnik effect can be explained by the cognitive processing that occurs in our brain. When we start a task, we create an intention or a plan of action that remains active in the mind until the task is completed. If this action is interrupted, the plan remains unfinished, staying active in our working memory. This continued activation serves as a constant reminder that something still needs to be resolved, which can be both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, this effect can be quite useful. It keeps our unfinished tasks in mind, helping us not to forget important responsibilities. This can be especially advantageous for long and complex projects, where the risk of procrastination is high. By deliberately leaving a task incomplete, we can use the discomfort of incompleteness to maintain focus and motivation, ensuring that the task is completed. For example, leaving a report unfinished at the end of the day may lead us to return to it with more vigor the next morning, due to the persistent reminder that it still needs to be done. On the other hand, the Zygarnik effect can also be a source of stress, especially when many incomplete tasks accumulate. This constant state of alert can cause anxiety, as the mind continues to process these pending issues, often subconsciously. For those who struggle with unfinished tasks, this can result in a feeling of overload and inability to fully relax. However, this tendency to avoid the uncertain can prevent us from expanding our horizons and discovering new passions and opportunities. Life, by its nature, is full of uncertainties, and many of the most rewarding experiences come from moments when we allow ourselves to explore the unknown. Recognizing that uncertainty is an inevitable part of life can help us develop a more open and courageous approach. The Unity Principle. The Unity Principle is an inclination we all carry, often without realizing it. It leads us to favor people we consider part of our group, whether by sharing interests, origins, or any other characteristic that unites us. This tendency to prefer those we perceive as ours can deeply influence our decisions and judgments, leading us to biased choices based more on affinity than real merit. In the brain, this inclination is rooted in evolutionary mechanisms that favor social cohesion and cooperation within groups. Throughout human history, being part of a tribe or community meant security and survival. Thus, developing a preference for members of our group was an evolutionary advantage, facilitating collaboration and mutual protection. The brain, when recognizing signs of similarity or connection with others, releases oxytocin, a hormone that strengthens social bonds and generates a sense of well-being. This neurochemical response reinforces the behavior of favoring those perceived as belonging to our circle. However, in a modern and diverse world, this tendency can become problematic. When we allow the unity principle to guide our actions, we risk making decisions based on unconscious biases. For example, in a work environment, we may prefer to collaborate or promote those who share our academic background, interests, or even cultural habits, ignoring the value and competence of individuals who do not fit this profile. This behavior can not only harm diversity and inclusion, but also limit the wealth of perspectives that contribute to innovative and creative solutions. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is a deeply ingrained human phenomenon that compels us to feel the need to give back when we receive something, whether it's a gift, a favor, or even an unexpected kindness. This principle is so powerful that it can influence our actions in ways we may not always notice, especially in social or commercial interactions. For instance, after receiving a free sample of a product, we often feel pressured to buy something from the same brand, even if we had no initial intention of doing so. This instinctive reaction is a result of an automatic response we have to balance social relationships. From a neurological perspective, reciprocity can be understood as a way of maintaining social bonds. The human brain is wired for community living, and survival in groups depends on cooperation and the mutual exchange of resources and support. When someone does us a favor or offers us something, our brain interprets this as an investment in the relationship, which awakens a desire in us to reciprocate in order to maintain balance and avoid a sense of debt. Failing to reciprocate can unconsciously create a feeling of discomfort, which the brain tries to alleviate through an act of reciprocity. While this tendency is natural and generally positive for social cohesion, it can be exploited in commercial contexts. Companies and sales professionals are aware of this psychological mechanism and frequently use it to influence consumer behavior. Free samples, gifts, and free trials are common tactics that capitalize on the principle of reciprocity. By offering us something for free, these commercial agents create a sense of obligation in us, increasing the likelihood that we will purchase their products or services as a form of payback. The mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is a fascinating quirk of human behavior that leads us to develop a preference for something simply because we are familiar with it. This phenomenon can be observed in everyday situations, such as when we start to like a song that didn't initially catch our attention, but after hearing it repeatedly on the radio or in playlists, it becomes one of our favorites. This increase in preference, driven by repetition, is a classic example of how familiarity can influence our emotions and decisions. At a neurological level, the mere exposure effect is related to how our brain processes the familiar and the new. The human brain tends to associate known things with safety and comfort, while the unknown can be perceived as potentially threatening or uncomfortable. Repeated exposure to a stimulus reduces the sense of novelty and, consequently, the uncertainty associated with it, making it more accessible and comfortable. This process is reinforced by a positive emotional response that intensifies with familiarity, creating a cycle where simple repetition increases affection. This tendency is widely exploited in various industries, especially in advertising and marketing. Brands and products are frequently exposed to the public through repetitive campaigns to create a sense of familiarity and thus increase the likelihood of being chosen by consumers. An ad seen multiple times can not only make the product more recognizable, but also create an impression of reliability and quality, simply because repetition made us feel more comfortable with it. However, the mere exposure effect can also limit our experiences, leading us to prefer the familiar over the new or unknown. This can restrict our choices, from the music and entertainment we consume to the brands of products we buy. When we make decisions based on familiarity, we risk overlooking alternatives that could offer greater quality, innovation, or even a better alignment with our personal values and needs. Self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is a psychological tendency that leads us to interpret events in a way that protects our self-esteem. When we succeed in some area, we commonly attribute this success to our abilities, effort, or intelligence. Conversely, when we face failures, we tend to blame external factors such as bad luck, circumstances beyond our control, or the interference of others. This pattern of thinking, though comforting, creates a distorted view of our reality and can hinder personal growth and learning. From a neurological standpoint, the self-serving bias is linked to the ego's defense mechanisms. The brain seeks to preserve a positive self-image, which is essential for mental health and well-being. Admitting failures or acknowledging limitations can be painful and threaten this image, so the mind often chooses a narrative that casts us as heroes of our victories and victims of our defeats. This narrative is reinforced by brain regions associated with pleasure and reward, which are activated when we feel good about our achievements. However, the problem with the self-serving bias is that it prevents us from learning from our mistakes. By not recognizing the role our own actions or inactions may have played in a negative outcome, we miss the opportunity to reflect and improve. This pattern of thinking can keep us trapped in cycles of behavior that repeat the same mistakes because we are unwilling to face the full truth about our contributions to our problems. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect is a cognitive trap that we all fall into at some point, even if we aren't always aware of it. It occurs when the first piece of information we receive, the anchor, has a disproportionate influence on our subsequent decisions, even if that information is not relevant or accurate. A classic example is the experience of shopping for a product. If the first price we see is very high, any subsequent price may seem like a bargain, even if it is still above the fair market value. Psychologically, the anchoring effect is a reflection of how the brain processes information and looks for patterns. Our minds tend to latch onto the first information received as a reference, and this reference can distort the assessment of all subsequent information. This happens because the brain prefers a clear starting point when facing decisions, especially in situations of uncertainty. The anchor provides a sense of security and facilitates cognitive processing, even if that security is illusory. This phenomenon is not limited to shopping or financial negotiations. It can appear in various areas of life, such as when we are considering a job offer and the initial salary discussed influences our expectations, or when the first piece of data in a scientific or political discussion shapes our perception of the facts. This predisposition can lead us to make judgments prematurely influenced, affecting our ability to make rational and well-informed decisions. Exploring the various mental traps we face daily reveals how misleading our thought processes can be. These cognitive biases highlight how complex and, at times, fallible the human mind can be. Recognizing these tendencies is the first step in overcoming them and opening up to a clearer and more balanced understanding of the world and, of course, ourselves. Thank you for sticking with us until the end. Your likes and subscription are very important to us. Help us keep the Books Project alive and continue delivering high-quality content. Wishing you peace and see you next time.